Welcome everybody to another episode of the Good Deeds Don't Investing podcast. I'm your co-host Chris Seveny, and today we are going to be doing a case study, and I've got two special guests with us, Jamie Bateman from Labrador Lending and Erin Quinn, a rock star attorney out of the Southeast. Erin, Jamie, how are you today?
Doing well, Chris. Thanks for having us.
Yes, can't complain.
Yes.
Another day in the life.
All quarantined at home. Erin, ladies first. I'll let you kind of do an intro about you, your company, and what you do.
Okay, so I've been a real estate attorney for the last 11 years. 11? Yeah, 11 years. I started out actually in the industry in 2002 as a legal assistant, opened my own firm after opening several large firms and helping them grow. And my actual firm, Quinn, opened for business in June of 2018. And I handle creditors' rights for on the foreclosure and bankruptcy side in both Florida and Georgia for smaller investors. Mainly are my clients. I have a couple institutional lenders, but most of my time is spent in private lending with folks like yourselves. So that's kind of brief history of Quinn and myself.
And states you're licensed in?
Florida and Georgia, okay. Both federally and at the state level.
Okay. And one thing to just mention is, I mean, those two states, some with them are two, I'd say, complete opposites in regards to foreclosure. And you got Georgia, which is, fast and furious. And then you got Florida, which is judicial, which is the complete opposite. And today we've got Jamie on, who's going to, talk about his Florida case study. So Jamie, why don't you share a little bit about yourself? You've been on the podcast in the past, but for those who haven't heard you.
Sure. So as far as real estate and notes go, I've been an active real estate investor for about 10 years, but kind of really got serious about it in 2014, 2015. And so my wife and I have a small portfolio of rental properties in Maryland, which is where we live. And essentially all townhouses in one condo. And then, like I said, 2015-ish, really got serious about it, started treating real estate like a business. And in the last 2 to 3 years, started pivoting over to notes. We haven't sold any rental properties, but I really like the way they work together, which is something we'll likely touch on here. But so I really like real estate investing. I still work part-time for the Department of Defense, but that allows me extra time to focus on this stuff.
And you're going to expand your rental portfolio with a Cecil County acquisition, right?
Speaking of case studies, yes, we need to talk about that one. But possibly. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
So are you prior military?
Yes.
Branch?
What branch? I was an Army officer.
Okay.
I was technically in the reserves the whole time that I was in, but did about 4 years of active duty time within that reserves time, and was in Iraq for a year, and that helped me pivot over to my civilian job. So yeah, that was a good experience. I've been in multiple leadership and management positions over the years, and thankfully in my quote unquote real job, I'm no longer responsible for anyone else.
And it also looks like you haven't had trouble getting to the barbershop either recently.
No, that is one thing that hasn't changed as far as the pandemic here. So it's changed for my son. I just cut his hair last night, so he looks like he's about to go into the military. I don't think I've paid for a haircut in 15, 17 years. So
my mom is a stylist. And we, after she quarantined for 2 weeks and we were quarantined for about a month, she finally started coming over. So we have haircuts all around, but I am rocking the grays right now.
Well, not like this.
I'm getting the mushroom top because it's still short on the sides and at the top. And my wife cut my son's hair, but she's afraid to cut my hair. And I'm like, I don't care, cut it, just cut it short. It's going to grow back, you know. I'm
Cross
not,
it off, yeah.
yeah. So, Jamie, you've got kind of an interesting case study today because you've had an asset in Florida that you acquired, and we've got Erin on kind of talk about some of the legal process that went through, but it was a foreclosure that ended up not going through the full process and ended up getting a deed in lieu. So we wanted to kind of talk about that exit strategy because it's something a lot of people hear about, but you don't really typically see it too often. And you took it to the next step and also, turned it into a rental as well. So be interesting kind of to hear how that went because I'll be honest, I've tried that in many instances and have just never been able to get it accomplished, more primarily because that renovation aspect of it has always been the killer for me in trying to find a decent contractor to renovate something. So I'm really interested and curious to see how you got it done and how you don't have a full head of gray hairs.
Sure. Yeah. So this whole process, and I'll try to gloss over some of the details, but it's for us. It started about a year ago. It was late April 2019. We purchased a note for $46,500, and we purchased it through PaperStack. This was really at that point. Well, you and I have a JV deal together, but I had a few other performing notes. But that was really it. So this was really the first non-performing note in that, the true sense of the term.
When you did your due diligence, what was the UPB and BPO values and stuff on the
Yeah,
notes?
so the UPB was about 93,000, 93.6. I have some notes over here. But the total payoff was much higher. 132 approximately is what they actually owed. Not that I really factor that in too much ever, but it's there. And the property value was right around that as well, probably 125 to 135, right around the total payoff.
So you're getting 50 cents on the dollar roughly in Florida, which is, that's a good price.
Yeah, and I thought it was decent. Turns out through the note investing world is very tight knit, and I later learned I'd already agreed to close at that price, but I actually learned during the process that the note seller would have taken 40,000. So you don't know that going into it, but so I still feel like we didn't overpay, but in that sense, it would have been nice to save $6,500. So yeah, it was decent price. And then the loan was already boarded with Madison, so I kept it there. And kind of just got, in the beginning, you know how it goes. You're kind of waiting for a month or 6 weeks to get everything kind of situated. It was probably a little quicker since it was already with that servicer, but and then in August, actually in July, the borrower said she was planning to refinance. I knew we hear that. Now I know, and I didn't necessarily believe it at the time, but I was certainly hopeful. She and I guess 4 or 5 others were going to refinance and whatever. So ultimately, that was just a stall tactic. I'm assuming maybe she tried. I'm not sure. But there really hadn't been any contact with the borrower since October 2018. Very limited, if any, between her and the servicer. So she, in July, says she's going to refinance. That never materializes. So in August, she totally went completely dark, no contact whatsoever. And that's when I reached out to Erin because we weren't getting anywhere trying to work with the borrower. So my plan at that point was just to move forward with the foreclosure.
So when you say move forward with Erin, in Florida, I'm guessing the steps are pretty much the same in most states, but can you just quickly just walk us through kind of once you get a package from an investor, kind of the process or steps you take for people who haven't been through this? Because I know we get a lot of listeners who avoid foreclosures or try not to go through them.
Absolutely. So Florida, obviously, a lot of people hear bad things about it just because of the length of the state and how long it takes to foreclose and the fact that it does have to go through judicially. I think the biggest aspect of delays on the front end that I see when the file comes in the door is breaks in the assignment and allonge chains and breaks in the pay history. So the biggest thing in Florida, being that it's an original doc state, that it does go through the judicial process, is having that paperwork in order. Many servicers are getting to the point now where they're starting to rectify those things on the front end, at least at the bigger financial institution level, or those that are handling mid to large size portfolios. And they kind of do all of their rectification in the beginning before we get the file. That said, every time we get a new referral, the very first pieces that we need to figure out from an investor, especially at the smaller or the mid-size to smaller investor level, is going to be, do they have an allonge chain completed? Are there any irregularities? Do they have an assignment chain completed? What are the irregularities? And then making sure, basically, does the client want us to immediately send a breach letter? Do they want us to immediately order a title search? Because all of these things involve like smaller fees and costs on the front of the action that can add up. And each individual lender or investor is going to be different with how they want to handle. So I've got some that provide me their own title, and I'm just supposed to use their title to proceed. Then I've got some that want me to order it, which I prefer to do because I use Florida companies that know the laws here specifically, rather than a big nationwide, chain that does, kind of due diligence title or something similar like that. Then some servicers want to send a breach letter. Some servicers want the attorney to send the breach letter. We look at statute of limitations. Are we close to a maturity date on the mortgage? Because that's also a concern. Making sure that we file timely. So there's a lot on the front end for us, and the fee structure for Fannie Mae that my office follows, and most of the firms follow, actually has a lot of front end heavy fees and costs, and that's because the majority of the work happens in the beginning of the action. So all of that stuff in the beginning, making sure that you're set when you file suit, is extremely important. And that was actually one of the issues that we had with this specific case, and we're really happy that it ended in a deed in lieu because of just the issues that we were not necessarily able to rectify on the front end, that we were trying to get done before we filed suit. So I can go into that, but we can, do you have questions? Or
I have a question, because this came up, and I have, I've heard of this in Florida about the pay history. And going back, basically from what I hear, the beginning of time, you need the pay history, which, and a lot of the stuff that I say us Main Street investors buy, it's been serviced by these parties. And as it gets transferred, there's loans originated in 2007 and 8 that they've gone, delinquent in 2017, and trying to get pay history from the beginning of time is almost impossible. So can you explain what the requirement is for that? And does it have to be like from beginning of time, or just from the beginning of the default? And what happens if you don't have that information?
So ideally, the full payment history is preferred. And the reason is because that goes directly to your damages. It goes to whether or not the borrower defaulted. The payment history shows when the last payment on the loan was. And Florida is not 100% required, like you'll never recover if you don't have a full payment history, but it becomes more difficult to foreclose if you don't get that full payment history. We haven't had too much of a problem with it in my cases, just because even if files become contested, many of them end in modification or end in consents to final judgment without having to actually go through the contested trial aspect of things, which is really when that payment history is going to matter. So on the front end, it's not super important that we have it before we file suit, but it is good for the investor to know that that's a potential roadblock, so that they are aware of that when they're doing any kind of loss mitigation, or just they can work on it while we're proceeding through the file to see if we can get as much as we can. There's been times where I've just gone on LinkedIn, like I had a missing Bayview payment history on a loan, and I just reached out to somebody that I knew at Bayview and said, hey, do you guys have this? Like I need to see what you had. And so there are ways to rectify that. I would say, if I was going to say an order of what is the best case scenario would be life of loan payment history. Then your next best case scenario is at least prior to the default, so that you show the loan was current, and then there was the stoppage of payments. Absent that, if you don't have that information, it is going to be an uphill battle. That said, there are some cases in Florida that essentially establish the practice of prior servicer histories, which essentially means there's like a boarding process within your organization that essentially makes the data reliable. So the whole purpose of the prior servicer documents is because of the reliability of corporate records. So Florida looks at business records as hearsay. You know, you were looking at a payment history entered by SN. SN has their process in place. You didn't physically receive that payment. SN received the payment. So you don't have any personal knowledge as to the receipt of that payment. All you have is somebody reporting at the personal level, the personal knowledge level, into a system that then logs that information. So Florida looks for essentially the business records exception to the hearsay rule, which means that it's made at or near the time of the transaction. The entry into the system is made at or near the time of the transaction by a person with knowledge, which means the person putting in the payment, physically depositing it or physically logging it into the system, and in the ordinary course of business. They're not doing it for the purposes of litigation. That's their ordinary course of business, and that's what they do normally. So the boarding and incorporating process from the prior servicer is what becomes very important in Florida in those situations where it's traveled and changed so many times. And how you can rely on the payment history, for instance, now that doesn't show those past dates, is that boarding and incorporating process. So what the courts look at is, did in this instance, Labrador Lending receive a payment history or payment history data from the prior servicer? Did their servicer or Labrador themselves then input that information into the system? Was there a QC process to make sure that it was accurate? Did they see any red flags in the prior payment histories or anything that was done incorrectly that they had to fix? So basically that front end process of taking, company A's records and then now converting them into Labrador's records is what is important to the court. And that allows the court to have that prior servicer exception and allows them to essentially say the records were boarded and incorporated into Labrador Lending's payment histories, and therefore the records, and they've been QC'd, and this is the process, and the person testifying knows that this is the process, and this is what happened, and then that person then basically makes the records reliable. So that's kind of where that gap becomes concerning just from a litigation perspective, is any hole in the payment history is a hole in your case. It doesn't mean you can't recover. It just means that there's a chance that the damages aren't going to be deemed as sufficient. The judge could decide that you have no proof that the default occurred if you don't have the payment date of the default in your payment history. If there's other screenshots and stuff, again, there's other evidence that can kind of get around those things, or at least go to show or to prove that 51% mark that you have to have for the case to be proven by the preponderance of the evidence. But generally speaking, the more information and the more history you have, the stronger your case is going to be.
That's really, you don't hear about such an emphasis on pay history in other states, at least from my experience. I don't know about you, Chris, but
certain states, Oklahoma is another one that is really anal in regards to, Oklahoma goes to the point of, like, if it doesn't state whether a person's single or married, that's like a fiasco. So I've seen it in Oklahoma, Pennsylvania as well. So, in some of the judicial states, yes, but some of the, like in Maryland, which is kind of quasi-judicial, never had an issue with it there. So it's kind of, Florida is one of those places where kind of really definitely seen it.
I'll say for our deal, this deal, I don't recall pay history being too big of a concern. And I think the fact that I didn't switch servicers probably helped, but I think that there were a couple issues. One was the assignment to us had some issues that we had to take care of, and paper stack was great to work with to get that addressed, got that fixed. But the real big issue that I was focused on at that point was there was the allonge from, I think, 3 or 4 note holders prior. We had the allonge, or I think Erin refers to it as an endorsement, but it had the wrong company name on it. So I had to go back through, and you mentioned LinkedIn, just to kind of putting on my private investigator hat and just trying to research who to track down. And, I was making some headway there and found really the guy I needed to talk to, and kept saying he was going to fix it, going to sign it and all this stuff. And, there's really no incentive for him at that point to even cooperate unless we, threaten legal action against him. And Erin can speak to that better, but he kept saying he was going to do it. I think he was just busy. And bottom line is I never actually got that. But that's when the deed in lieu kind of wiped out all these concerns.
Yeah, I think once she indicated that she was willing to sign the deed in lieu, the allonges and stuff kind of became a back burner item for the time anyway, because we focused on resolving the default in general through the deed in lieu rather than risking it through the foreclosure because of that specific issue, and potentially, not knowing whether or not we were going to be able to get it fixed.
So
Right.
how far down the line did you get with the foreclosure? I'm guessing, you sent a demand letter. Did you file a complaint as well? And did it make it to that stage, or how far did you get?
No, we finished it right away, or we got it settled before we filed suit. So we didn't even have to get to that point. And we wouldn't have filed suit without fixing that allonge situation, at least to the best of Jamie's and our ability. Sometimes you have to file with not the best case scenario and just see what happens. But in this instance, we were able to fix it before we even filed suit, or get the deed in lieu before we filed suit.
Okay. So, Jimmy, a few questions. As part of the deed in lieu, did you offer cash for keys, or,
So no, she just accepted,
there you go.
So, I mean, I say no, but the reality is she was getting a lot of debt forgiven. So I wasn't going to be cutting a check. I did not, cut a check to her, but she owed, $132,000, and she was walking away without a foreclosure, and a considerable amount of debt forgiven. We can get into the property value. Wasn't quite as high as I hoped. So in that sense, she had even more debt forgiven. I'd say she probably, realistically had $20,000 to $40,000 in debt forgiven. So in a sense, that's cash for keys. But no, I didn't cut her a check.
Yeah, one thing that I found, as you know, in kind of some of these deed in lieu situations, which we're working on, is sometimes instead of offering up the cash, it's give people time. I found people are more interested sometimes in time than they are the cash. Whereas, okay, I'll give you $1,000 if you're out in 2 weeks, or hey, look, today's towards the end of April, I'll give you to June 1st or June 15th, which
Right.
when you think about the money you're saving with rent or whatever it is, it's an equivalent to a cash. And the reality is it's really not, at least, it's time, but it's not burning a hole in your pocket where you're actually putting out the money.
Right. And that is definitely what happened here. We gave them 2 months. So it turns out that the borrower, to my knowledge, was not actually living in the property. I'm not totally clear on that. I probably never will be. So we got a call from her brother-in-law saying that he was renting from the borrower, and I forgot to mention earlier that she was on a 3-year trial payment plan, and so instead of her payment being $1,100 to $1,300 total, it was $400 including escrows for 3 years, and she was still failing to still failing. This was prior to me purchasing the note. That the forbearance agreement and trial payment plan were executed. So when I purchased the note, she was in the middle of that, and was still not paying, and apparently collecting rent from her brother-in-law. So back to your point about letting the occupant stay in the property for some period of time, we allowed them 2 months and again, I don't know if she was physically there or not, but so we were giving them, I think, November and December to stay in the property. And then as we're getting closer to the end of that 2-month time period, is when the occupant, her brother-in-law, said, "You're going to have to evict me." And he claimed he wasn't leaving. So this was coming up on right around, the holidays. And the reality is you have to file, and Erin knows much more about this than I do, but it's a 15-day notice for eviction. And the fact is, it really wouldn't be in our best interest to try to kick this guy out, on December 20th or something like that. So we gave him till January 1st, January 2nd, something like that. And they did end up buying a house of their own, from what I understand, and vacated the property at that point.
So it's funny, I have a borrower who actually was just buzzing my phone, whose payment, same thing, their payment's about $400 a month, and they haven't paid in about 5 years. I think, no, actually 2014 is the last payment received. I had bought the loan in November, and of course, things have, with the legal process, been stalled, but the borrower is looking for forbearance because of COVID-19. But 6 years prior, they haven't made any payments, but now they want the forbearance. Right. So it's interesting in regards to, you see some of these trial payment plans and stuff that people you try and put them on, and they still unfortunately fail. And when you have that conversation with them about, hey, what's your rent payment going to be? And that's when they realize, well, I can't lose this house. And it's like, well, you can't afford the house. So,
right. So I wanted to make sure both the borrower and her brother-in-law were not playing me here. So I did request a copy of this contract, that his purchase contract for the house he was allegedly buying, and they did produce it. His real estate agent, seemed legitimate to me. So I was willing to work with it, because, and I do think they had some medical, disabilities and things. And when we talk about the property itself, it's clear they were not living in the healthiest of conditions. And so I was willing to work with him a little bit there, and it turned out well in that regard.
Okay. I was going to say, a question I was going to ask is kind of jumping back to the deed in lieu, because it's a mistake I see a lot of people make, and that's not ordering a title report before taking on that deed in lieu. Is that something you did? What did it look like? Okay.
Yes, we did. And that was definitely Erin's suggestion, and we ordered it through Erin's firm. So,
okay. So I had an instance for a property once that when I bought the note, I ordered title and everything was fine. And about 4 months later, the borrower wanted to do a deed in lieu. And I just like, you know what, I'm just going to order the updated title. I don't, it was one of those things where it's kind of like, I just ordered it. I don't see anything online. And lo and behold, because the borrower was collecting rent, it was a duplex where they weren't paying, but they're collecting rent. They had a property manager, and the property manager filed a $12,000 lien against the property. Wow. So luckily, I was literally ready to sign. I mean, and they had signed the deed in lieu, and I just needed to sign it. And thankfully, I basically called them. I had my attorney call up and say, "Hey, we're not signing this. There's this lien on it." And then we tried to. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that's a really good point. I mean, it's not something most people would probably, consider doing. I did work for a title company years ago for a couple years out, after college, and which I'm baffled that they don't, our school system doesn't teach anything about title insurance or buying a house, but that's a rant we can go on.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things I remember was like, even if you get title insurance, that's really the only kind of insurance, or one of the very few, that goes backwards. So your homeowner's insurance, your car insurance covers you from this point on, or maybe a few weeks ago forward. Title insurance, title search, it does nothing for you, and beyond that date. So that's a really, really good point.
I think one of the things with the deed in lieu that I always look for is, yes, clear title, but there are ways around that. so that you get out of having the borrower defenses raised and stuff like that, but then you can still proceed with your foreclosure kind of on an uncontested basis, which does accelerate it. So depending on the state that you're in, Florida, for instance, does allow non-merger deed in lieu's, which is essentially a deed in lieu with merger language that says it doesn't merge with the outstanding debt, the mortgage. It's essentially separate from that. So what it allows you to do is to take title from the borrower, and then you can foreclose the remaining interests below you or inferior to you in the process. So if you do want to do a deed in lieu on a property, the very first thing you need to be looking at is whether the title is clear. If it's not, is there a way to rectify that? Can you take the deed in lieu from the borrowers to avoid their defenses in the foreclosure, and then proceed with filing suit against the underlying lien holder so that you can get rid of any interest they have in the property? So that is something you can do.
I've never heard of that. So it's basically a deed in lieu. You get the property, then you're just foreclosing, because technically you're still in first. You're just foreclosing on people behind you.
Correct.
Okay. So, and you can do that now. Can you do that with like condo and HOA fees and stuff like that? If someone's like, hey, I don't want this condo anymore, and still foreclose, and then I know you have to pay the 12 months or, 1% or 12 months or whatever it is of fees, lower that. Can you still do it in those instances? Curious.
They become liens just like anything else. So if they're not, if they're inferior to you, then they can be foreclosed. So, there's probably some people that are going to watch this podcast are going to be, second lien holders, and the big, most of Florida at this point, I think most are ironed out where a first lien is going to be superior to the assessments of the association, other than the safe harbor you're talking about, which is the 12 months or 1%.
Yeah.
Second mortgages in many instances are not superior to the association. So you can't foreclose the association anyway. And like getting a payoff on any superior liens to you is going to be your big concern there. If you intend to keep the property or to figure out your bid, if you're intending to sell it or let it go to the auction, like you kind of, decide what you're going to bid at the auction based on what the outstanding superior liens are. So yes, it can be done. It's just a matter of making sure that it's done properly so that you can get rid of everybody that you can, and then you're only on the hook for the things that you are aware of that are in front of you. But yeah, the association is definitely one that can be foreclosed to the extent that declarations allow.
Okay.
Interesting.
So Jamie, you
basically got the
The audio is a little.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you for a second.
Oh, sorry.
can you hear me better now?
Better.
Now it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. So you had, you got the deed in lieu, you got the borrowers out of the property. What was the property condition? What was it like?
So we had done, and part of the stipulation, with the deed in lieu was that we would be allowed access to the property. And we did an interior inspection, and it was also supposed to be, room swept. I do have some takeaways from all of this. Looking back, I mean, we didn't do a thorough enough interior inspection, while we had that 2 to 3 month period where the people were still there. It's a little more challenging when there's all kinds of junk and everything in the house, but based on the interior inspection I had ordered, I was pretty pleased with the condition of the property. I just probably should have ordered a more thorough inspection, frankly.
Who'd you order it from? A preservation company, a realtor, a home inspector?
Yeah, it was Safeguard, and it wasn't anything, they did a good job based on what I ordered. But it just probably, I should have paid more for a more thorough inspection. Ultimately it probably wouldn't have changed anything. It just would have properly set my expectations. And, so for 2 to 3 months, I was thinking, might need $5,000 to fix this place up. And at that point I was going to sell it. I really had no interest in keeping it. And, come to find out, well, we definitely need a new roof. So there's $8,000 or $9,000 right there.
5 turned into 35 is my guess.
It turned into 25.
Okay.
And of course now we have tenants in there and it's starting to creep up a little more, but that's just the reality of things. But it's all, the bottom line is we were in it for about 50, as far as the acquisition of the note, and Erin's exorbitant fees. I'm kidding, totally kidding. Legal fees and whatnot, and then about 50 there, and then we ended up putting 25 into it. So all in, we're in at about 75, which is still pretty good, considering we did a pretty good size rehab. Didn't fix everything up, but new flooring, repainted the entire house, exterior and interior, new roof, which there was tons of leaks coming in from the old roof. So kind of redid what we needed to, and a lot of trash out and just clean up in the yard and that kind of thing. So I do expect the maintenance costs to be a little lower than they would have been had we held this as a rental and not put so much money into it up front. But yeah, I was going to sell the property, and really I listened to a podcast, and that was a case study or a look into the Jacksonville rental market. I'm not sure if we mentioned that before, that this is, it's in Jacksonville. So that kind of got me onto keeping it as a rental. And then I thought, like I said, we have several rentals already locally, but not one at a distance. So I was like, why sell it now if we don't desperately need the money to buy another note or something else? I can sell it in a year if it's terrible. We fixed it up and made a profit, kind of a flip. So at this point, we have tenants in there. It was advertised for 2 days before we got a 12-month lease, and this was in the middle of the pandemic. So I'm definitely glossing over some things as far as the rehab and the selection of the property management company and that kind of thing. But ultimately, it's been, so I did 2 blog posts on this, one in December, and I was definitely a little overly optimistic at that point. And but in hindsight, it's still been a very good deal. As far as the numbers go, and I also, in my second blog post, I linked to a 2-page PDF that breaks down the numbers in much more detail than we're going over here. We can't, unless you're going into Baltimore City or somewhere where you're just going to have so many headaches, and you can't find those numbers in Baltimore County, which is where our rental portfolio is. So it could have been better, but ultimately I think it was a success story.
So so I have 3 questions. How'd you find the contractors? How'd you find the property manager? And what'd you end up getting for rent on the property? So
$10.75 for rent. Take care of the easy one.
Yeah. That's the 2% rule.
It's like 1.43, I think, is what it came in at. So,
which is still excellent.
Our rentals here in Maryland are probably between 0.8 and 0.9. With a 0 first, not a 1.
Yeah, I was going to say, as you get closer to DC, that number keeps creeping. And, I was actually I'll digress a little bit, on Facebook last night, and somebody was talking about, the 2% rule and stuff. And I said, yeah, my market at your 0.5 to 0.8 and stuff. And they're like, yeah, it's ludicrous, you'll go broke. And I said, actually, you know what? Everyone I know that's bought real estate in DC in the last 15 years is driving the fanciest car and everything else because of the appreciation. And that's the one thing people forget is, yes, you don't have the positive cash flow, but I've got a condo 6 miles from DC that I bought 6 years ago for under $100,000, and thing's worth over $200,000 right now, and it cash flows $50 a month. So
we have I've told you briefly about this, Chris, but we have, our first rental was a condo, and it's very close to where we live, and we have had one tenant in there. He comes to my house with 6 months of checks, drops them off. Nicest guy. He's divorced. He doesn't want to own anything. He's been there for over 10 years. And could we take the money and do better with it? Yeah. But I barely even think about this thing. And it's just
same with mine.
Yeah. So anyway.
Erin, do you own property? Any investment property? Do you invest?
Well, I would if we didn't run two of our own businesses.
Yeah.
So I actually have always enjoyed real estate. And we actually did well on our existing property that we have here. I bought in East Lake Woodlands in 2011, which is in Oldsmar, which is north of Tampa Bay. And the market at the time, I think this house went on the market initially for about $240,000, totally out of my price range at that point in my life. And it's in this really nice kept neighborhood. It's established. It's been here since like the 80s. It's got all these beautiful mature trees. And, you know, we ended up lucking out getting this property at an estate sale. The person that had owned it had no mortgage on it and had passed away, and deeded it to a nonprofit that he ran in Illinois. And they just did not want the property anymore. So they put it on the market at 240. I think they had an offer at 180 and they declined it. And 3 months later, they were freaking out because they, you know, had to take care of the pool and the lawn and all that kind of stuff still. And when we took a peek at it, they had actually gone back out to try to find those buyers at the 180. Hoping that they would want to purchase the property. So funny enough, the realtor had like total diarrhea of the mouth. Like she was telling us all this stuff about, you know, that she shouldn't have been telling us because we just used the leverage to buy the property. But I think our initial offer on it was 160. We settled at 170, and then they gave us a $3,000 stipend for fixing the soffit. So we ended up purchasing at 167. And the neighborhood average is probably 250 to 300 at that point. I think the property now, because Florida's crazy with their values, but it's probably in the 350 to 375 range. The last time I had it appraised. So we have put a lot of work into it because it was original when we got it. But overall, like we have tons of equity, even with the market, you know, starting to slow down, like we still have plenty of equity in the property and things are still selling crazy here. So, but I actually was just sitting here as Jamie was talking, thinking to myself, you know, I have this 401k that's kind of sitting out there and I just lost money, obviously, in the stock market on it. And I'm like, do I want to take it out and just start investing? Because one of the things that as I started going to these conferences, where I started meeting everybody was that I was like, man, like I can totally do this. Why am I not, you know, investing my 401k into investment properties? And I have not taken the dive yet or the plunge yet, but it's coming. I think right now for us, you know, given that I started the firm 2 years ago and just my husband's company also started 2 years ago because I don't even know, what is it, masochists? To start business at one time. I don't even know what the term for it is.
Can you talk about your husband's business a little bit, because it's actually a pretty cool business, and it invites people on here, and you know, you can, you know, give a quick spiel on it and stuff, because I heard it and I'm like, that is awesome, actually.
Yeah, he actually said he's like, if you get time to talk to Chris, tell him I still want to talk to him about it. And I was like, okay, so so let me let me finish the investment piece first, because otherwise my brain won't be able to go there. So we, you know, just decided at that point, like we're keeping all of our money just in very, you know, conservative, still sitting in the 401k kind of situation until we know that the companies are taking off. And then at some point I'll probably pull at least a little bit out to start doing it and kind of slowly get I'm sure I'll be reaching out to you guys to ask a million questions because I don't know your side of it at all. So short answer is no, I don't own besides my house, and I probably should. I wish I did. Especially now. This is a perfect time to invest right now, I think, as the market is now taking the turn. So, but I'll be plenty busy in the office, so there's that.
Yeah, I'm sure you're probably, you know, especially, you know, in Florida and Georgia, I'm sure you'll probably start to see, you know, additional cases starting to hit in those areas. So I'm pretty
conservative with investments. And I think that, you know, if I were to get started, I think what I would do is reach out and, you know, to somebody that I knew that was in the business and just say, hey, you know, can I give you 10,000 just to get my feet wet in the door and figure out, you know, the situation and kind of go from there and build up and kind of do it from a holistic, you know, or bootstrapping model rather than, going out and looking for funding and, all that stuff. So that's kind of my thought process on starting. And I think that that's where a lot of people are concerned. They're like, I don't have the money to buy a whole house. It's like, you don't have to. Like, you can buy parcels, for in the note industry. You don't have to deal with, like you guys do, with tenants if you don't want to. You can just own the paper and be done with it. And there's been plenty of success stories on that side of things. So there's definitely a lot to be had in the industry.
Now, do you have a solo 401k?
I do.
Okay, good. So
Yes.
nice. So
Yes. And then the rest of my 401k is in the businesses. So we cashed out a lot of it to self-fund while we started mainly my husband's company. So when you're ready, we'll talk about that one.
Yeah. So actually, I want to jump to Jamie real quick to kind of because it's something that everyone struggles with, which is finding contractors, property managers. So I'd like to kind of hear that side of the story. And then I am interested in two things. One is your husband's business. And then secondly, kind of the overall cost of foreclosure in Florida. So the POS attorney I used a year and a half ago on 2 cases that somebody referred me to, I can finally really call them that because of what they charged me on these 2. And I'll tell you.
I was open 2 years ago.
I know. Somebody referred me to somebody else
No,
saying
it's okay.
how great this attorney was, and this person is the worst.
So just as far as finding the property management company, honestly, I probably got a little lucky, but did some research, just talking to people on Bigger Pockets and different, Facebook groups and whatnot. Settled on Suncoast Property Management. They're pretty big in the Jacksonville area. And actually, how I got tipped to them initially was through that podcast that I listened to. I contacted the host through another group that I'm in, but he put me in touch with the property management company. And even though they try not to, they try to make you go through their company first. But so got in touch with Suncoast and did some research on them, and it just seemed like in general they have really good systems. It's really interesting because we hired a property manager here locally for our rentals probably March of last year, so a little over a year ago. And these 2 management companies could not be more different. I mean, it's like, our guy here is great, but it's a really small staff. I go to one person, I know exactly who I'm talking to. Whereas with Suncoast, frankly, I've had 3 different, main points of contact already. And so that there's a little bit of the consistency there is not quite there, but I will say their systems are phenomenal. I mean, it's, that they have their web interface and they know what they're doing. So it's like, just let them do their process and it will work out. It won't, may not be on your timeline, but they're a professional company for sure. So I really relied heavily on them to find the contractors. And, had I been down there managing the contractors myself, probably could have done this for 15, 18 grand or something. They're obviously making money on it. And I probably could have done it a little faster. But, I'm 750 miles away and it is what it is. So all in all, I was pretty happy with the job that they did. So they would get me bids on a few different contractors on each part of the project, and we make a decision and kind of go from there. Certainly it's, it's like managing notes or anything else. From a laptop and a phone, it takes work, and you have to have your own systems established as well. But that's kind of how we settled on the property management company. And the I will say Mario Brothers Restoration did a phenomenal job. They did most of the work. But with that said, it's like if it's terrible, you can switch property management companies. So we'll see how that goes. But that's how I kind of settled on them.
Have you physically gone and seen the property?
I've never been to Jacksonville. So I would like to. What's that?
Business write-off.
Yeah, I mean, I really was starting to talk about it, and then COVID.
Or Orlando, Jacksonville,
Yeah, right.
2-3
Justifiable.
hours, so
Right.
you got kids, Orlando's not
Listen,
that
Tampa
far.
Bay is where it's at, you guys.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I have a coworker who is just down in that area. I think Lakewood Ranch. That's not too far from Tampa, is it?
Nope.
So
Brand new area coming up.
Yeah. So I'm a little bitter with Tampa Bay right now because I'm from New England and I'm a Patriot fan. So we're just gonna stay a little bitter at this point in time. But
so just have to come see your boys play down here, huh?
So.
Did you hear that Tom Brady got cited for working out in a park in Tampa?
Yeah. So.
And then he walked into a stranger's home.
Yeah, he walked in a stranger's home.
Definitely making his presence known around here. So and he's renting Derek Jeter's mansion on Davis Island. So.
Oh really? Okay.
So Erin, quick question. Jumping back to Florida foreclosures. Typical timeline and costs, uncontested, because contested's a whole nother animal. But if, someone recommend, hey, I'm looking at bidding on a note and it looks like it may go to foreclosure in Florida, what should I budget for costs, uncontested, and what would you think for a timeline?
I think uncontested, you're looking at probably 6 months to a year on the timeline. I think the fastest foreclosure I ever did, which was in my legal assistant days in like 2003-ish, was 82 days. And that was literally doing everything on the day it was allowed to happen and setting the hearing, really quickly and just making sure that all the paperwork was in. But those are kind of long gone at this point just because of all the different requirements. Now, that was also when foreclosures were $1,200. So there's a lot more involved in them now. So I would say 6 months to a year is a good timeline on an uncontested case. It shouldn't take any longer than that. As the bigger waiting process for us is going to be, and that's from complaint filing, I should say, not just from file receipt, because the front end, like doing all that work to make sure that the paperwork's all in order is, its own animal and kind of involves you guys pretty heavily. After that, you guys have to file sign a verified complaint, and then we file it, service of process, then go to your judgment hearing. You're going to have to sign an affidavit for your judgment hearing. Hearing goes forward, auction is set, and then it goes to sale, usually around 30-day mark if there's nobody there asking for more time. The cost to do that from a Fannie Mae perspective is $4,100 is the entire fee. And it's done in 5 milestones, essentially. So you pay 30% when files received in-house. I usually charge that post-demand letter. I don't like to, if I'm sending a demand like the day I get the file or within a couple days of getting the file, and they reinstate the loan before, I have to do any real work on the file, I don't feel like I should charge that 30% fee up front. So what I do usually is I'll just charge you guys for the demand letter and the costs. And, that's depending on, most of them are under $150 for the cost of the demand. And then if there's a lot of work from a loss mitigation perspective, then it does kick into, an hourly rate, or we do what's fair. Or if that file received milestone is charged at some point and we start doing loss mitigation, then I kind of tie that all into that fee. So I'm not going to charge you to receive the file and then charge you to work with the borrower, at least not prior to the litigation being filed. If it is something where it's really extensive, then I'll reach out and say, hey, can I charge a little bit for this because, this is what's happening and this is kind of the outliers. But for the most part, you're going to, that demand period is going to be super cheap for you guys. Then the 30% is charged once the file, like basically the demand failed and we have to proceed with the foreclosure. So we order title, charge file received. Once the title comes back, then complaint filed, you're charged 20%. Service complete, you're charged 20%. Judgment entered, you're charged 20%, and then 10% once the sale is held and the certificate of title is recorded. So it is a front end heavy process, and that's just fees. So your costs in Florida, your main costs are going to be title search is about $200-ish. Your complaint filing fee is a graduated rate based on how much the value of the action is. So whatever your payoff is your value or your claim of, or your value of claim that you have to pay the filing fee based on that. And it can range from $400 to $905 to $1,905. And then they charge like $10 per summons and just some little fees at the courthouse for different, things that for each action that are going to vary. But that chunk, the filing fee is going to be the big chunk. Then service of process is next, obviously paying the process server, and depending on whether they're avoiding service or they actually are just easy to serve, could be anywhere from 4 defendants to 15 defendants, and then service of process costs are associated. I say they generally are within the $500 to $1,000 range from a cost perspective, but it is just a pass-through cost, not something that we upcharge. And those are, that comes at that service complete milestone is when you're going to see that. For the most part from there, there's not a ton of costs associated unless it becomes contested. So everything's going to kind of be front end heavy, and then everything will be included in your final judgment and can be attached to your bid when you bid at the sale, your credit bid at the sale, or, if a third party, or if it gets paid off, for instance, you should be able to recover all of those amounts. So those are kind of your big ones. So there's going to be like the 4,100 again, split over 5 milestones. And what I do see with a lot of the smaller investors is that a lot of the foreclosure counsel just charge straight up hourly rates. And which, admittedly, I will say this, working with smaller investors, because you guys are very high touch and you're very involved in your portfolios, and
A lot of hand holding.
It's even just, you guys have much more of an interest in moving your cases as fast as possible to free up your own money, where, big banks, like it's a number, like they're sending you 600 files a month, so they don't care. So I understand the hourly, or at least an increased fee based on that. Fortunately for my clients, and I'm sure there's, plenty of attorneys that do follow the Fannie Mae guidelines. I follow them because I use technology to assist me. And that's how I was trained in a big firm. That's, the 2 big firms that I opened that are still, open and doing business, that grew from the 3 employees that we were to 400. They all use technology resources, and I've been lucky enough to be involved in that, in the programming of that technology and the handling of it, where I know a lot of lawyers are kind of like afraid of technology. They actually have a rule, just so you know, with the bar in Florida, that like you can apply to not have an email address associated because you don't have email. Who doesn't have email? Like,
Wow.
So it's things
I can
like
name
that.
about 20 borrowers.
Oh my gosh, man. Like, it's craziness. So I utilize the technology the same way I would with the big lenders. And I do understand that the hand holding is there. And like I said, if I see that there's something that's really going off the rails, and I'll say something and say, hey, can I have a couple hours to handle this one issue? But I don't think for the most part I've had that issue. And I think with Jamie's file, I don't remember if we charged you the file receipt fee or not on that one, but I know that we included all of the loss mitigation and whatever the bill we sent was, which I don't remember. So, but yes, that's kind of the overall for Florida.
Yeah, I was on 2 condos in the same complex. It took about 18 months. It was uncontested, and each file ended up costing me over $8,000 for each one. And
yeah, I could see that in a, I mean, you're probably okay. So full foreclosure, you're probably looking in the $6,000 to $7,000 range at least on uncontested. So it is, you didn't get too bad of a deal.
Okay.
But it also depends on, whether you went to mediation, because there's fees associated separately from that.
Yeah. They were dead, so we didn't have to mediate.
So the other piece with dead people is, we call them dead guys in the office, the dead guys. The other piece with deceased borrowers is going to be
notifying the family. Yeah.
Yeah, and the air search is extremely expensive. It's a private investigator that most of the firms have worked with for 15 years. His name is Skip DeBornick. Amazing guy. He can find anybody. And but
can you send me his information, because I'm trying to find 2 people right now. Does he do nationwide or just Florida?
I think he does Florida for lenders, but I think he can potentially get death certificates from other states. I don't know if he's got connections though, so I can absolutely pass along your information. He's a great guy. He's been doing it. So the very first firm I was at is now it was Ron Wolf's office. It was a Chevrolet and Associates when I started there in 2002, and that's where I met Skip. But yeah, I can absolutely pass along your information. I also have TLOXP, so if it's something I can run a search for you and try to see if they're showing up as deceased in the in the skip trace, then I can do that for you.
I actually spoke to them yesterday about getting signed up. So
Did you?
Yeah, I've talked to them like a year ago, and then kind of now I'm at a point now where, so I've got some files, and this was one of the questions I was going to ask. So Florida, deficiencies are allowed, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do you do deficiency judgments?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on. The answer is yes. They're on the back end of the foreclosure usually. Usually do the foreclosure first. And then it's usually just either a supplemental complaint or potentially a motion and order on the back end of the file.
Yeah, so one of these I foreclosed on. I know the borrower has other property in another state, and they kind of just walked from it, and it was a strategic foreclosure. But again, because the relationship with the attorney I had was so it was just a lot of conflict. They would never answer any questions. The only time they would ever answer questions is when they send me a bill. And then I got the excuse that their excuse for not responding to any emails was that they were moving, they were living with their mother-in-law, and he was going through a lot right now. And I'm like, okay, great, but I really don't need to know your personal life. I just
you don't care.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care.
No. Yeah, I mean, we all have our problems, right?
Yes.
So I can't say that it's never been something that, a sick kid or something has gotten in the way of me responding, but it shouldn't be an all the time thing for sure. It should be an outlier. Especially knowing when you work with smaller investors that they are, high touch and that they are, wanting to move things. There really shouldn't be that lack of communication. So,
yes. Jamie, anything else? What were some of your lessons learned?
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I just have they're very basic slides. If you don't mind me.
You should be able to, if you just go to share screen at the bottom, you should be able to share your screen. Okay. There you go.
So this is not a death by PowerPoint, trust me. Because it's Google Slides. No.
Look at that curb appeal. Woohoo!
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Is that new front porch? New stairs?
No, actually that was there. So yeah, and I do have before and after pictures on the second blog post. If people go to labradorlending.com, go to blog, there are 2 different blog posts about this. So there's a lot more detail there. But I just quickly wanted to touch
I'm just glad none of your tabs say like Pornhub or anything like that.
So
you're hearing about that on this.
One, this is my wife's laptop, so that's my first excuse. Nothing like that. So I just have really just 3 slides. Things to improve: speed. I think with the time value of money, this whole thing took a year. I think we could have done a better job, and by saying we, I mean me. It wasn't terrible, and there's certainly reasons for everything.
You can blame your wife; she's not listening.
Right, exactly. And actually, speaking of my wife, we have tightened up a lot of. So she started working for the business officially in January of this year, and she really handles most of the due diligence, especially on the kind of the title work side of things. So when I bought this, I was kind of flying solo and maybe took on, skipped a couple steps that I shouldn't have. But I do think we've improved things dramatically as far as our processes. But, time value of money, what can you do with that money while it's tied up in some note or property in Jacksonville? I think we could have done this in 8 or 9 months instead of 12. Due diligence, like we just touched on, we've already kind of beat that one.
It's a good point though with the allonges, because most people only think of due diligence on documents that are recorded, and allonges aren't recorded. Right. And there's a lot more behind the scenes that people need to look at than just what is on title. So
yeah, and I think that was in my mind. It's like you know, Alonja's whatever, but Erin's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it's kind of the most important thing in Florida. So, but you know, let me say a point on that aspect of things. You know, it really does benefit you guys to reach out to an attorney in your due diligence process if you can get them to review it quick enough for you to put your bid in and stuff. Because I do run across, especially the paper that you guys are buying that's transferred hands, you know, 6, 7, 8 times.
Right.
I do run into quite a bit of, you know, stopgaps that, you know, things that are going to take you time to fix. For instance, in this instance, it was an allonge from homeowner's friend to Bravo Credit that was done. And there was a gap between Bravo Credit and I think Apollo Financial or something.
Yeah,
and when we reached out to Apollo, he was like, I didn't get this from Bravo Credit. I got this from homeowner's friend. Like I bought it from homeowner's friend, not Bravo Credit.
right.
So there was essentially an incorrect allonge on the file and now a gap between the two. And it was, you know,
Right.
something that, and, you know, not just you, Jamie, you know, I have several investors that come to me that, you know, bought loans that were just like, I just figured we could just deal with it when we, you know, after we purchase it, like, no, you know, I've got the original note. I don't care about the rest. And those allonges or endorsements are extremely important. And I'm really happy to see that you spelled endorsement with an I.
So I was literally going to bring that up, and you taught me that word. The spelling of that word, I should say. But yeah, it still looks pretty odd to me.
Well, the good news is it is interchangeable, but it's just the Florida UCC actually spells it with an I. And I don't know why Florida changed it or if it's like that in other states. But I now spell it with an I. You wouldn't believe the amount of clients I've had try to correct me on that. And I'm like, actually.
I definitely Googled it when you first used that in an email to me. I'm like, what is endorsement? But yeah, I guess it's in financial contexts like this, it's appropriate apparently. So, so negotiation when purchasing the note, you know, we bought it for 46.5 and turned out I could have gotten it for 40. There were 2 partners on this deal that owned this note, 2 sellers basically, and I was dealing with the one, and the other, his partner, through a kind of a back channel, I guess. I learned that I could have paid 40. You know, you never know, but I think I could have bought it for less. Estimating the rehab costs, you hear this all the time. I listen to a lot of real estate podcasts, and it's, you know, once in a blue moon, you probably end up spending less than you thought you would, but it's extremely rare. So, and I've done several rehabs, you know, myself, and so I should have known better. But we definitely were on the light end of when we estimated what this would cost us to rehab.
It's one thing I'll mention, like with the rehab, but you know, with BPOs, I'm negotiating a note with someone right now, and they're like, "Oh, the BPOs, all the houses are selling in the neighborhood for 1.25." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, those are houses that have finished wood floors, they've been painted, you know, so forth." I said, "Show me an REO that you've seen recently that has, you know, finished wood floor." You know, I said, "You're going to put easily, you know, basically." You know, 20 grand, you know, $20 a square foot into a property is probably what you're going to put in that, in some sense. So
Right.
I said, there's easily 20 grand worth of work in there. And they like, well, this is what the BPO says. I'm like, I don't care what the BPO says. It's like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's one thing, just stick to your guns is one thing I would recommend.
I think one of the biggest things that, or one of the biggest, I wish I would have that I hear is and Jamie, you mentioned it, is the roof, like getting a good
Right.
look at the roof and figuring out what the roof is, because the roof can actually cause so much interior damage as well. So that, you know, having a good roof on the property is actually important for even the inside
That's exactly
value.
right. Yeah, and that's exactly what. So in Florida, you have these 4-point inspections, which is not a term I was familiar with, but to get insurance, that's what they call it. And that's when the roof, the glaring issues with the roof were exposed. So that's when we realized, oh boy. So
was it AC roof, electricity, and there's a 4th one I forget.
Well, I guess the HVAC, you know, yeah. So those are the 4: the heating and air conditioning. And so, yeah, that was a huge chunk right there. You're right. But then we got in, and there were another thing that slowed us down and cost money was the bed bug treatment. There were bed bugs throughout. I hope our current tenants are not not watching this.
least it wasn't a meth house.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we would have known that from from an inspection until you start moving things around. And so they had to do 3 or 4 treatments, and you have to wait, I don't know, 1 to 2 weeks in between each treatment, go back. And so that cost us probably a month and maybe $1,000. I'm not exactly sure, but that was, yeah, it kind of speaks to just the condition that these people were living in. It's really pretty disgusting. I recommend people go to my blog to see the before and after pictures, just to see a little bit of what the trash, was like. But it's not a ton of pictures on there. I can certainly send people more, but it was another $1,000 just for the trash out, or close to it. It might have been $850.
It's not bad.
A potential, I guess, suggestion for dealing with something like that. And I know that we indicated that we wanted it to be in broom swept condition when she left, and that kind of didn't happen.
Right.
Sometimes what people do basically in conjunction with the deed in lieu and a settlement agreement is offer essentially money on the back end. Like, I'll give you $200, $300 if you make sure that it's broom swept at the end. So that way you go in and you don't have those trash out costs.
Right.
And you're not even dealing with just the headache of it. And so
Yeah.
we do have some settlement agreements that provide for that information when they vacate, and basically they don't get their money until the inspection's done.
Right. I mean, in this scenario, he was the actual occupant was saying, "You're going to have to evict me." So
Right.
my
Yeah.
biggest concern was getting them out, and then I can handle, eat the cost of that. But I hear what you're saying. It makes
Yep.
perfect sense.
Yeah, not a scenario in this instance. She didn't live there. The actual
Right.
borrower didn't live there. So
I had a borrower who broom swept it and vacuumed it and asked for their money, and they left all their furniture, all their clothes, and everything they didn't want in there. And they're like, "Well, it says broom swept condition, so we sweep the floors and everything." And they missed the line where it says, removing all personal items. They're like, "Well, it says I would get $500 if it was broom swept condition." It's like, no, that means basically empty. So
yeah, that's not.
they literally thought
all your
they were
stuff
due.
isn't industry standard.
They literally thought they were due the money, and
No, I
attorney
broom swept
basically
the
had to-
dresser that I left there. I broom swept everything. Just quickly, some things we did well: just networking and team building, from afar, incorporating multiple real estate strategies. So note investing, most of the parts of the BRRRR method, where you're rehabbing, renting, refinancing, repeating, that's still an option. Something I may look forward to, may look to do as far as pulling out some of the equity and either buying another note or buying another rental property. Just kind of problem solving along the way. And then improving our own processes for our note business. So I don't mean as particular to this deal, but we talked about the due diligence, and we've really gotten a lot better in the last year since I purchased this note, as far as knowing what we're doing and being more efficient, using technology like Erin was talking about. Real quickly, this is the last slide. Why I love this case study: it just benefited so many different parties. The note seller had a problem note that, he'd done a forbearance agreement, trial payment plan. She still wasn't paying. So they wanted out as far as the note sellers did. Benefited us for sure. The borrower walked away from tens of thousands of dollars in debt and no foreclosure on her record. Definitely, we got the previous occupants out of a really unhealthy situation. I don't know what their current situation is, obviously, but it just wasn't good. And I think that's what it came down to. We kind of had to force them out to help everybody move along, and get to a better position. And then just vendors and contractors, and just the neighborhood in general. There's at least one house that's in a much better condition than it was a year ago. And our current tenants, we're providing affordable housing for them. And like I talked about, it just displays multiple strategies in one project. So this case study, and it will, I'll probably have updates to it later, but I don't present this like, I'm the only person who's ever done this before. I'm some guru or something, but it does incorporate several different strategies. You're dealing with non-performing notes, rehab, buy and hold rental, from a distance. So it's probably the deal that I'm most proud of thus far. And then also highlights many of the positive aspects of note investing in particular. So just multiple options. We were headed down. I was trying to work with the borrower. Ideally you get the note reperforming and sell it. But that wasn't an option. But then, foreclosure is an option. Ended up doing deed in lieu. I know, both of you can speak to other note exit strategies, but it's really one of the primary reasons I enjoy note investing is it gives you options. You're not pigeonholed. You're coming in so early in the process that you really have many different ways you can go.
So, Jamie, who negotiated the deed in lieu? You, the servicer, or Erin?
Erin and her partner at the time,
Okay.
again.
So that's one thing just that I would mention is when negotiating deed in lieus, typically try and either have yourself or your attorney. I typically try and start with the attorney, but sometimes they like, hey, can you work on some of the final, once they agree, there might be something like I offered 500, they want 1,000. At that point in time, maybe I might do some of the negotiation, whatnot. But I say that because try and keep it away from the servicer, and it's no offense to servicers, but the time, it's not their focus, and they take time. I find attorneys or yourself are much more aggressive in that sense. So just 2 cents on that.
Part of, the feedback I would have on that is, with the servicer specifically, they are, the borrowers are so used to seeing paperwork come from that company. They're probably inundating them with loss mitigation opportunities. They get, something in the mail every month or every 2 weeks when they're in default, trying to get them to do something. And
Right.
I find that a lot of times something coming directly from the investor or from an attorney's office, makes them take it much more seriously. I've had opportunities to reach out and get in touch with borrowers that even the investor hasn't been able to do because I have an Esquire after my name, and it's for whatever reason, a lot of times they just take it that much more seriously. And we usually try to make that our first communication with the borrowers, and just kind of make sure that it's strongly worded so that they potentially know that this is when this is the time to make the deal if it's going to happen.
Yeah, I do think that was very helpful in this case. We just really weren't getting her attention the way we needed it, and then we did.
I had heard that Esquire is actually a title that they used to use for people who didn't have a title back in the day.
Probably true. I mean, all I do is read a lot and research a lot of stuff, so there's that. And entertaining.
Okay. Well, last thing I just want to wrap up on, I do want to go back to Erin because I do want to hear a little bit, if you got a few minutes, about your husband's company as well, and then we'll wrap this up because it's everyone's lunchtime here on the East Coast.
So my husband, actually part of the reason I mentioned the prior military thing, Jamie, is because my husband is also prior military. So my husband, a little bit of background, always wanted to be a commercial pilot. And obviously the industry has gone away from, as the planes have gotten larger, there's not as many pilots, the pay isn't as great. It's a lot of time away from family. And he had a really hard time really deciding how to take his life on another path after that. So he did several things via owning his own businesses. He did aerial photography for a little while because he is a pilot and he loves photography. He was in the military. He worked for the Department of Defense as a civilian contractor for a few years and was in Afghanistan and actually flew drones for the military. And then he came back to the States and decided to start working at a satellite imagery company. And he was an imagery analyst. And when he was sitting at his desk one day, he was thinking to himself, it's really annoying that I can't see the type of car that's on the ground right here. I can't count the amount of people that are on the ground right here because this imagery is, even though it's brand new imagery, the resolution is 30 centimeter resolution, which means each pixel is 30 centimeters, right? So you're not going to really get much in the detail aspect of things. And he said to his company, why are we not doing like augmenting this or supplementing this with drone imagery? You know, it could be a really good add-on for the company. And they were like, we're a satellite imagery company. We don't do that. So my husband was like, well, someone needs to. Enter Raven Spatial, my husband's company. We essentially, he started building out the idea to essentially create the Uber of drone and smartphone technology, using a crowdsourcing model in the gig economy to push that model forward so that you can get on-demand imagery at any property you want at higher resolution than you would get in satellite imagery, and obviously at any given time. Like you could order today and within 24 to 48 hours you're going to have your imagery from that property. So we started the company about 2 years ago. It is very technology driven. It's as I started listening to clients at a lot of these conferences and stuff I went to, I was kind of like, my industry and my clients are his clients. I have people complaining about the lack of ability to get, good imagery of the roof. Is there an air conditioning unit on the side of the house? Whose cars are in the driveway? Things like that. And so we kind of just decided to bite the bullet. He actually started it as a grad school project, and he was going to build out his company while essentially graduating with his degree. And then we realized that the university would take some ownership aspects of that. So we decided that he wasn't going to do it that way. So he left school to form the company and to do it. So basically what he is doing is his company specifically is essentially the technology aspects behind it. So what happens is, and this is obviously a fully built out, system that we're working towards, but we're not there. But the idea is essentially, let's get orders from people that need this imagery, and we will basically take it in-house, prepare a flight plan, an automated flight plan, send it to our drone operators, and essentially they have an app that has all the tasks in a specific area, wherever they want, really. And they can choose to fly the flight plans and fulfill the orders for him, but they don't have to do the actual flying. And so essentially what it is it allows my husband to standardize it all. So oblique imagery is a big one. I think a lot of you guys want to see like the sides of the house, the conditions of the side of the house, but the roof too, and pool equipment, air conditioning units, like all that kind of stuff. And so he has essentially 3 different products. First, like via, either smartphone imagery, which is all automated as well. Like the phone takes the pictures based on his inputs from it, not the user. So the user is literally just the boots on the ground, like controlling or providing the smartphone or the drone. And then all they do is press a button and it automated, it takes off automatically. It flies an automated flight plan. It can go through whole neighborhoods if you want it to. It can do grid work. It can do the oblique imagery, just depending on what the user is looking for, and provided at 3 centimeter resolution, which is 10 times better than satellite imagery. Down to the fact that you can actually see the roof, like the tiles on an individual roof. So you can see whether the roof is damaged, how important that is to, your investment properties, and especially on a very quick basis that you guys need, for instance, in your due diligence process on the front end, rather than paying for this crappy BPO that's some realtor snapping a few pictures, you can, of the front of the house, you can actually see from the air what the property looks like, what the backyard looks like, and kind of get an overall view. So that's kind of so then once the drone operator finishes, then they upload the imagery, and it's all stored in the central repository for the end user, for the client. And the client can go back to that imagery. They can export it, if they want to export certain photos, and it will also come geotagged with all the information that was provided with it. So it essentially standardizes the process of the picture taking, so that you guys have better, more clear, timely imagery of your properties, whether that be something you're looking at or something you currently have that you want to just kind of monitor and keep an eye on.
That's fascinating.
That's cool. Has he spoken, out of curiosity, as you start to build this out, I think a huge client basis also, besides us as investors, would be the preservation companies. because they have, like right now, I know Jamie and I, if we want pictures, we usually order stuff through them and say, hey, send somebody by to go take pictures. If they had, and same thing, they have a mass people and so forth. So from a scale perspective, something like that, preservation companies as well as banks and lenders and stuff that want to do, or appraisal people and stuff like that, that would be, that's a pretty cool idea. So.
Yeah, I think that his initial vertical was, real estate, just because it's easy.
Yeah.
We've talked about actually a ton of different verticals for it. One being on the government side with the Department of Defense doing, even counting bodies, or when I say bodies, I mean people at like IDP camps, you've got indigenous displaced persons on a border of Syria, like how many people are living in that, in that area, or change detection for, IED beds, things like that, that can change, that can detect, topography changes so that you can see whether or not there's an IED laid in a certain area on a convoy route. Or another big one that we've actually tested is hurricanes, Hurricane Michael, disaster relief, FEMA, FEMA stuff. After a disaster goes through, a lot of times you can't take satellite imagery of a ground zero essentially until after the cloud cover clears. Drones take that away and allow you to be able to do very quick analysis, prior to essentially getting that satellite imagery back at a much higher resolution. So he actually went to ground zero during Hurricane Michael and did some missions, just kind of testing things out up there for that. So I think that there's several verticals, real estate obviously being one of them. And I agree, we have been speaking to Clear Capital about, the value proposition for them with respect to their BPOs, and giving you guys a little bit more information on your BPOs. And, but yeah, it's definitely, there's a few, you guys obviously being the end users, and the thought processes is a lot of you guys will gobble it up, just from a, at least to see what it can do for you. And then obviously then stepping into the middle towards the preservation companies and looking at the price point, making sure that, price wise it works for those companies, because they're all competing for y'all's work as well, so making sure that the price point is right for those BPO companies is definitely another piece of the pie. So
yes,
that's I could definitely see there's a huge need there for sure. I mean, like you just talked about, but just piggybacking on what Chris said about, I'll typically order inspections through Safeguard, and they're good, but it's like the detail's not there, and then like you already touched on, but the consistency is not there. I mean, it's sometimes they're great and really thorough, tons of pictures, lots of, and the other times it's like, what am I paying for? This is a joke. So
I got one yesterday of a guy taking a picture of his feet, and I'm like, and I replied back to him, I said, and they do a great job, but I'm one who, if I see ways a company can improve, I'm not shy to just give my 2 cents, because some companies like to hear feedback, others take it personally. So I basically said, look, all I want is 8 pictures of the property. I'm like, every time I order, just get me 8 pictures. I mean, this one's like a guy's hand. And I'm like, doesn't anyone actually look at these? And then they take a picture of the house, and it's like a quarter of the house. I'm like, what's the whole house look like? I'm like,
Right.
So it drives me nuts, and so forth, that like you said, it's so inconsistent. And the reason being is they don't have, in my mind, a set protocol for each person that they send out to do it. It's just, hey, go take pictures of this property. It's not, here's what you should be doing, which is a standard operating procedure of, okay, take 2 pictures of the front, 2 pictures of the side, try and get a picture of the roof. If you can get the back, great. If not, what's the street look like? It's
the drone imagery piece of it is really cool. Obviously a lot of people want the roof, is the big driver there. And I love that he can fly the drone remotely from an automated flight plan. I think that's really cool. And it even takes the pictures automatically. So the user itself really has no inputs in the final product, other than supplying their drone and getting paid to supply their drone in their area. So that he can get the imagery that he wants. So everything on the back end is also QC to make sure that you know, the quality is there. And then with the smartphone imagery, he actually did it so that like the person has to hit each frame, and it's a 360 panorama. So it's all again standardized. It's not the person hitting the button to take the picture. They have to frame it just like you would. A good example of that is the mobile deposits where you have to like line up the check perfectly to get the picture. So that's exactly the same concept, just in an image form, so that you can kind of get a 360 view from the front of the house, or the side of the house, wherever the points are put is where that person has to stand, or the image or the app won't even launch for them. So it's really neat to see it come together, and hopefully we'll get it totally off the ground here soon. I mean, he is fulfilling orders locally right now, but we're very much bootstrapping while we hopefully get some investment funds, but who knows with COVID. So
definitely an entrepreneurial family right there.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Him more than me. I didn't ever think I'd own my own firm, but it's been working out, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I want to thank Erin, Jamie for joining us today, and it's been a great case study. And Jamie, I know we'll be sharing a story of ours together. And Erin, I know you've got plenty of stories you could share as well. And I'm actually looking at some stuff down in Florida right now that I may end up be sending your way if I'm able to get this seller to move a little bit. They're just being way too rigid from that perspective, but we will see. And so thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay sane, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You guys too. Good talking with you both.
Thanks. Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks for all the help you've